I just want to make some short remarks responding to the governor's State of the State. First, I would like to commend the governor for proposing to expand Medicaid coverage. That is critically important in Ohio. It will help many people who right now simply cannot get health care coverage. We need to have Medicaid expanded, and I appreciate his comments on that subject. I also heard the governor talk about the creation of jobs. I think the governor claimed credit for creating every single job that's been created in Ohio. And it's particularly interesting since I just heard of a national election where the Republicans were constantly saying that the government doesn't create jobs, but I'll let that go. The governor claimed that Jobs Ohio is working, which I find interesting since Jobs Ohio hasn't even been funded yet. Even if Jobs Ohio is working, it's impossible for us to know since there is no accountability, no sunshine. He even exempted Jobs Ohio from the ethics laws of the state. The governor talked a lot about a variety of things with great flowery language, but when you look behind it, the facts simply don't support his statement. So, for example, he talked about the importance of protecting Lake Erie, yet he signed one of the most harmful bills we've had in Ohio, allowing businesses to take virtually unlimited water out of the rivers pouring into the lake. And he failed to note the lack of environmental protections on the fracking that could also harm our water here in the state of Ohio. The governor talked about cutting personal income taxes and the tremendous job creation benefits that will have. It sounded a lot like 2005 when the Republicans also cut taxes, income taxes, promising the creation of tens and tens of thousands of jobs. And yet when that tax cut was fully implemented, we were actually in a loss of jobs in the state of Ohio. What does bring jobs, by the way, to Ohio is good communities, good schools, and the governor has slashed the funding for both our kids in schools, leaving many kids in class sizes way too big, with schools that have cut programs for music and arts and physical education and all sorts of things. And he's cut funds for local governments that's resulted in many layoffs of police officers and firefighters around the state, leaving our communities less safe. The governor talked about the turnpike and bonding against the revenues. He talked about raising the tolls, which in and of itself is not necessarily very good for businesses in Ohio. But he failed to talk about the fact that he's going to borrow against future revenues in order to take the money from Northern Ohio and spread it around the state with no guarantees in this budget about where the monies go. And he talked not at all about how we're going to be able to continue to maintain and make improvements on the turnpike after the revenue is committed for all the future years that it will be. He talked about the third grade reading guarantee, which is very nice, and how important it is to have third graders read at a third grade level. Yet there was virtually no money in that when that was created, making it totally meaningless. When you add on the fact that, in fact, not only was there not money, unlike Florida, which he pointed to, which devoted a great deal of money for extra tutors and other services that would have helped kids read, but in addition, he did mention the fact that not only did he mandate third grade reading without additional funds, but that was on top of the $1.9 billion or so of cuts to schools that same budget year. Finally, I'll close with noting that the governor talked about the importance of bipartisanship and how the public is fed up and tired with the hyperpartisanship in both Columbus and Washington. I agree with those comments. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is more of the same here in Ohio, more partisanship. We saw the efforts that we made to take partisanship out of the clerk's office in the House undone. With respect to the budget, several of our members just this last week came out and offered an olive branch indicating that we like the Medicaid expansion, that we can work with, that we hope to work with the governor and come up with some changes to his proposal that we could all support. And his comment was something like, these people have no credibility. He totally rejected the effort and has made no effort to work with us at all. With that, I'm happy to take questions if there are any questions, or have anybody else respond.
How do you beat John Kasich in 2 years?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How do you beat John Kasich in 2 years?
I think John Kasich, if he runs on his record of slashing education, slashing funds for local communities, making our schools, destroying education potential in the state of Ohio and harming the safety of our communities, I think he'll beat himself.
Can you give some example or two of maybe some of the other areas of the budget besides Medicaid where changes could be made that would maybe draw more Democratic support, maybe to the tax changes or the education fund?
Absolutely. The governor talked about the fact that there's $1.9 billion in surplus funds, plus there's more revenues coming in, so there's money to work with. Rather than doing another income tax cut that benefits the wealthy disproportionately, he could take a portion of that money and put it towards making up the cuts to schools, our kids, local communities, safety forces. If he did that, perhaps there'd be something we could work with the governor. Any other questions? Any other comments?
I want to share, one of the things that I found particularly interesting was the point where the governor talked about the fact that we need to get away from the use of smoke and mirrors in budgeting. And given the fact that we've had such a difficult time getting answers out of this administration on the budget proposal, I thought that was very, very interesting, in particular related to the education provisions. We heard from the governor about the importance of making sure that kids have a chance. And yet earlier today, a number of us from the House Democratic Caucus sat down and listened to local educators about what they are experiencing here in Lima in the classroom. We heard from teachers who teach in a technology magnet school where the students are working on their projects and they cannot print out their work because they don't have ink for the printers in their school. In that same meeting, we heard from an Alita school board member that they are meeting this evening. I believe that meeting started at 7 o'clock to vote to cut $500 million out of their budget. So, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on in this budget. There are a lot of very high-sounding principles when the governor talks about it, but what you need to look at is not the philosophy, but what is actually happening in this budget. And there are nearly 400 school districts, many of them the poorest school districts in the state, that aren't getting one additional dollar in the governor's education budget.
The question was, what's going to defeat Governor Kasich in 2 years? And I think what ultimately will defeat him are the numbers. He's made a public statement recently that he's not interested in the numbers, it's all about the philosophy. Some of his philosophies many of us actually agree with, but the numbers don't demonstrate that he has the capacity to deliver them. And in the area of jobs, he continues to talk about the job growth, where here in Ohio we have 3 times the disparity in minority communities of unemployment that's continuing to escalate. So he's certainly not bringing jobs to all people of the communities. Armin and Debbie have both spoke to the disparities in the education numbers. Within the Minority Business Enterprise Department, you're talking about, what does he do to garner more people towards his side? Well, that's it. How about addressing the needs of all of the people in the state of Ohio? And it's beyond just the top 1%. But where there are disparities, you have to recognize that and accommodate for that if you're really trying to lift all boats. And when you're zeroing out the MBE line in your budget, that's not good for small business, minority business, female business, disadvantaged business, or any of the other sectors that he says he actually has concerns for. So at the end of the day, I think it's the numbers that are going to bring him to defeat.